Ahead of an expected hike in interest rates today, Labour are urging the Prime Minister to get his fingers out of his ears on the cost of living crisis.
Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds joins us now. Jonathan, when you say, get your fingers out of your ears, what do you mean?
Yeah, good morning. Nice to be with you again today. Well, first of all, I think we all recognise it's very difficult for people right now. The cost of living is the big issue, and that's what we saw in the local elections last week. We've got both a short and a long-term plan. On the short term, we, as we've discussed before, want to use that windfall tax to freeze things like council tax, to bring people's energy bills down and reduce their outgoings. But the longer-term picture is we cannot have more years of this low-growth, high-tax, poor public service environment. And that, for us, are about turning this country around, having a proper industrial strategy, making Brexit work, attracting the kind of investment we're seeing the Biden administration do in the US, fixing business rates, sorting out the apprenticeship levy. All of these things, there's many things on the shelf that a government that wanted to respond to this could do, both to alleviate the cost of living on people, but also to make sure we're on a much better path for the longer term. And I'm hoping for a general election as soon as possible so we can put that case.
I'm just reading the press release that the Labour Party have issued today, trying to claim that the Prime Minister is personally responsible for the economic situation, specifically in relation to mortgages. I mean, that's a bit rich, isn't it? We all know it was all down to Liz Truss last September.
Well, I'm certainly not here to exempt Liz Truss from blame, because that kamikaze budget was, quite frankly, atrocious. And yes, the figures we've launched today show the cost of that, an average rise in interest payments of £3,000 a year for the 1 million households who've had to remortgage since that time. But Rishi Sunak has been an integral part of this government. He's been the Chancellor. He has set the conditions in the Conservative Party that actually, I think, allowed Liz Truss to become the leader. So I think he is responsible for that. I think it's right to hold him to account for that. And fundamentally, I do not see anything in his agenda that responds to this low growth, high tax, poor public services trilemma that we've had for the last 13 years.
I think if Rishi Sunak were to be sitting where I am, he would say it's a bit rich, though, to make me personally responsible for that. I think most people attribute, when you think about his sort of financial record, the furlough scheme, rescuing them during the middle of the economic crisis. And actually, he stepped in with his Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, and done well to try and solve the problems of the previous administration. And we've seen, haven't we, that the banks have now said yesterday or this week that they got it wrong, that the pound is rallying better against the dollar than they thought, and we're expected to see growth forecasts revised upwards by the end of the year as well.
Well, Rishi Sunak, first of all, generally never accepts very much accountability for anything, and then second of all, tends to tell us we've never had it so good, and I'm afraid it isn't true. Now, first of all, I don't think it is in any way acceptable for each successive Conservative Prime Minister to pretend they've had nothing to do with the government's record to date. He has been an integral part of this. On furlough, that was something we very much supported, but, it wasn't him personally paying for that. It was the state. It was us as a country being able to stand behind people in the pandemic. The TUC played a major role in drawing up that scheme, and that was the right thing to do. But I think if you look at the position we're in after 13 years of Conservative government, where most people are asking, am I better off? Is anything working better? The answer to those questions is no and no. And if we've talked on this programme before, the lowest business investment in the G7. What a disgraceful position for the UK to be in. A rate of economic growth which is actually lower than really any sustained period in our history. Productivity, which is the real driver of prosperity. How much are we turning out for every hour of work we put into the economy? Again, the worst in British history. This is not a good record. And if you just look around the world, look at what the Americans are doing. Look at the Canadians, the Australians, the Japanese. Look at the investment they're attracting into the jobs of the future. We are nowhere even on the pitch on this, and I just worry that if this continues, it'll get harder and harder to turn around not just living standards but public services too.
On accountability and on records, according to a member of your own shadow cabinet, an issue that still comes up time and again in focus groups and in internal polling is whether or not they can trust Labour on the economy, not least thanks to Liam Byrne, who left that outgoing note in the Treasury saying there's no money left.
I mean, first of all, I would just say Labour leads the Conservative Party on who the public trust on the economy in the same way it leads on public services, on immigration. We don't take any of that for granted, but clearly if you saw the election results last week, the amount of people in this country who are turning back to Labour in every part of the country, from Middlesbrough to Medway, from Stoke to Dover, this is not an insignificant change in the Labour Party's fortunes, and I don't think we could have commanded that level of support unless we were willing to be frank and say, yes, we want to win back the trust of the British people. We are very disciplined and robust when it comes to spending commitments. We will only ever say where money should go. Once we'll say how it would be raised, such as expanding the NHS workforce by ending the non-dom rule or changing the tax regime of private schools to fund for breakfast clubs. We're disciplined around that, and I think if we continue in that, that is how you both get the credibility and hope you need to come from opposition to government.
Well, we could debate it for much longer, but I do need to get one more question into you about the illegal migration bill. It's on the front of a lot of the papers this morning, the row with the Archbishop of Canterbury. What's your own position on this? Because we know that Labour, Sir Keir Starmer, said they wouldn't repeal the Act, so presumably you're happy to do and push through with a bill that the Archbishop of Canterbury said is morally unacceptable.
Well, no, we're not happy to push it through. I think the Archbishop of Canterbury is right in his analysis, both in the morality of the bill, but also in the fact that it won't work. And if you look at what we have put forward to tackle this problem, which is greater law enforcement, a special unit of the National Crime Agency to do it, an agreement with France on safe returns, fundamentally, rather than wasting money on the Rwanda scheme, spending it on processing the claims, which is the heart of this, is the fact the government processes a fraction of the claims it used to do just a few years ago, and certainly it did under the last Labour government. We have a completely different approach to this that would require legislation, and we'd replace the parts of this bill that we disagree with, which are much more positive, ethically and workable proposals to tackle this problem.
OK, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Jonathan Reynolds, Shadow Business Secretary.